right, let's go ahead and get started. And I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today. My name is Sean Odell. I am joining you all the way from Fort Worth, Texas, where it is close to the end of, well, I guess we don't have any more daylight, and it is still almost 96 degrees Fahrenheit and probably, I don't know, 40 degrees Celsius, somewhere around there. So it's a little warm here. But I am excited and really looking forward to our time today. This is Kubernetes adoption, making the hard easy. And we've had the opportunity to do this a couple of times. And, one of the things that I find interesting about this session is I learn something new every time. And so I want to introduce my co-host and cohort here. Adolfo, will you introduce yourself? And I'm going to unshare my screen so we can have a little bit of a conversation before we kick things off. So introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Hello, everyone. Adolfo Delorenzo. I'm the official geek of Portainer. Together with Sean, we're all geeks in this company. I'm the responsible for the sales engineering group in Portainer, and also I'm a product specialist. So I'll be here answering those hard questions that you guys always throw at us that are actually very amazing. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining.
Absolutely, Adolfo. Thanks for taking the time, and you are the first person that all of us technical folks like to talk to at Portainer. So,
oh boy, no pressure, no pressure,
no pressure. And just so everybody's aware, we've done this a few times now, and every time I have given Adolfo a challenge in his demo portion or just a conversation, he has been able to meet every demand. So, as we get into it, what I want to do is just have a quick agenda. I'll do a little bit of talking, just kind of set the stage for the conversation. But really what I want to do from there is really just introduce some of the core concepts, some of the key capabilities that Portainer really has had success, not only in our community, obviously with Community Edition, and many of you are probably aware of that, but our Business Edition customers and users. And so really excited to have everybody join today. A couple of important things before I start the agenda is feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. Now we're here to answer it. While Adolfo is speaking, I will attempt my best to answer any questions, and then some of them, just depending on time, I may actually open up to Adolfo for him to answer live, and so that will be a little bit of fun, and really excited to start the conversation today. So feel free to ask questions, and follow us on the socials if you would like. And really excited to have you. So let's jump into it. So we're going to have we've already kind of done the introductions. I'll do a slight reintroduction here in just a moment, but then we're going to talk about container adoption and really what I have seen over my 5 to 7 year journey. It feels longer than that in and around containers. The last I checked, it was, oh man, I can't even remember the first version of Kubernetes I used. I think it's been that so long ago. It is what it is. And so for container adoption, why we do it, but really what are some of the challenges behind it? Now, both of these are validated. You all probably have comments. You will probably hear maybe one or two things that you agree with. But what we want to do really in today's session is just show you how to simplify that. And where Adolfo is going to jump in for a majority of the time is he's actually going to walk through it for us and for you. And I really enjoy it every time. And just so everybody's aware, while I am not as, I would say, in the weeds technical as probably I once was, I'm still very technical, and I enjoy watching Adolfo respond to your questions. So feel free to ask questions. I'll help answer them as well. And that's it. So my role here at Portainer is I lead the developer relations team and the marketing organization. And glad to have you all. If you have any questions or feedback for today's session, feel free. I'm the one you want to reach out to. But as Adolfo said, he is the technical front man for us here at Portainer. And some of you may have either heard from him, talked to him, and if you haven't, you probably should. The other thing I will say as I jump into kind of container adoption, ask questions. That's what we're here for. We want to make this as interactive as possible, and always like that from our audience. And so feel free to jump in. So eat, sleep, code, repeat. I always actually start this with that lovely picture image on the right-hand side of this slide, because that is what container adoption is actually about. It's about software delivery. It is about service delivery. It is about ensuring applications are up and running. And in this case, it just happens to be in a containerized way. Now, I am not a developer, but I've done enough in and around development, especially around the DevOps space and the DevSecOps space, that there's some challenges that we see. Adoption of containers is a part of it. Some of it is people, process, methods for DevOps and GitOps and every ops, or I've even heard FinOps around financial ops and operations. But really what we want to focus on, and what our goal here at Portainer, and we hope is your goal, is really about software delivery. And that's why we have made the switch to containers. That's why Amazon has 20 different offerings in and around containers, and Google has their 4 or 5 different offerings in and around containers, or serverless applications, right? It is simplifying services consumption and utilization, and that's why we do it. The other thing that we've seen is there's a diversity in deployment. Gone are the days where you have a singular data center or a couple of data centers that are all under your management and you don't have any cloud assets, or in some cases you might be using a micro K8s deployment on top of Raspberry Pis, or inside of a manufacturing facility, or in your home lab, as a lot of our community edition and 3 nodes free users have enjoyed. And so it's really about deployment, and not only where the containers are deployed, but where the services are deployed. Just the overall consumption of containers is about simplification and diversification. The next piece is, and this goes back to that kind of image, is developer self-service. I continue and will continue to meet developers who have little to no desire to be too concerned about the operational aspects or the infrastructure aspects. And so what challenges have come into play is, well, I'm a developer. I need to provision I need to build a new service. I need to build a new application, and I'm going to be building in containers, but I don't want to have to mess with the developer environment, or I don't want to have to understand the security ramifications or, the intricacies of a container image, right? And so developer self-service is very significant. Last but not least, as we've seen a significant trend or a move by software vendors, including Portainer, if you're interested in that, as offering packages and services and software as containers. And so if you are new to this space and new to containers, you might look at those third-party vendor requirements and go, why do I need containers? Oh, well, they're telling me I have to. Maybe you're just not that far along in the journey, right? And we've seen that, and that's okay, right? Every organization, every individual, every development team is at a different stage in this journey. I am a firm believer that you need to deploy, deliver, services and software in a fashion that makes most sense to you. And in some cases, sometimes that's a monolith, and I'm okay with it. Sometimes it's a container. Right, but we have seen a significant trend where third-party vendors are forcing containers on the community and on our customers, and so it's a requirement. And so you're having to come up to speed, but you may be just new to it, and so that definitely provides a little bit of a challenge. And so with that, those challenges often bubble up. I like this idea of keep things simple. And I mentioned, hey, if you need to deploy monolith, go for it. Why make it overly complicated if you don't have to? But because we're moving in the container steps or in the container path and the container adoption kind of paradigm, there's a few areas that we have seen over and over again that are top of mind. They might be top of mind for you, maybe one or two of these, maybe one of them. And the first is really about knowledge and skill. I will be the first to admit, I learn something new every day when I am inside of Kubernetes. Because either I forget a command or I learn something new, or there's some new trial, or there's some new this or some new that. But what we want to do at Portainer is really help you bridge that knowledge and skill gap and simplify that in that process, right? It is a learning curve, and that's okay. You don't have to be shy about that. Nobody is perfect. Nobody understands every piece and part of a containerized world. And we're here to simplify that. No offense to the overall cloud native or container space in general, but the landscape's pretty complex. Whether it is observability, whether it is service mesh. I actually joined an organization focused on service mesh over 2 years ago now. And I argue that was still too early in the journey to be working with service mesh, right? Networking at the Kubernetes, at the container level is complex, not because it's a desire to be complex, but it introduces some new capabilities, some new aspects. And so it's just a complex nature, right? And this is not unique. Oftentimes we do see this as, oh, well, it's new and it's super complex. Every IT system in its infancy is complex, and that's okay. The other thing that we've seen from our community and customers in and around this space is about troubleshooting. It's not the easiest, right? I need to look at logs. I've got different hosts. I've got different, I've got different nodes, and I've got different pods sitting on said nodes. Well, where are they? If it's a cluster and there is high availability, right? So what our, kind of goal and overarching focus is really to help you triage and troubleshoot, and to do that in a simple way where you have it all within the same console, command line, as well as logs, all the way to metrics, right? Looking at every aspect. Now, you could go much deeper. You could have, included capabilities here and there, but really triage and troubleshooting is about simplification. And we want to bring that to the forefront. Last but not least, is there was always this idea of Kubernetes versus Docker or Docker Swarm. And oftentimes it gets overlooked, but it's a real challenge. And we at Portainer, we talk with customers each and every day who, in one moment, they are, attempting to manage Docker or Docker Swarm while also managing Kubernetes nodes, and that's okay. And so what we want to do is help bring that together, right? Different workloads, different complexities, different cloud environments. At the end of the day, our goal is to help you ensure that your path and your road to container adoption is simple and easy. And if that means having some in Docker, some in Kubernetes, some in micro-K8s, that's absolutely fine. Now, enough of the overarching why we've gone down the path of container adoption, some of the challenges, but now we're going to focus on a Kubernetes deep dive. This is making the hard easy. We are focusing purely on Kubernetes in this particular event, and so we hope you take the next few moments and really do appreciate what Adolfo is going to show you and articulate to you. And while I am stopping my screen and Adolfo pulls up his screen, Adolfo, if you don't mind, when it comes to Kubernetes or Docker, do you have a favorite? If you do, why? I don't have a favorite, by the way. I like them both, and they serve different use cases. So what are your thoughts?
I would say I like all of them.
There you go.
And I like Docker, I like Docker Swarm, I like Kubernetes, I like Podman.
Yeah.
I mean, so many options there, and each one of them serves a specific use case. And it's just, the good thing is that you have all these options, right? I mean, if we didn't, in the past, let's say, and it's not so long ago, when deploying applications was sort of like in a way that was sort of traditional and standardized, and you didn't have, actually, maybe it might be something very strange, but maybe you had too many options, right?
Yeah.
And that's when things broke, and they would break, and it was very hard to deploy because it was so open. now you have sort of a standard, and but you have means to deploy these containers using this standard sort of vision of containerized applications, and that's amazing, right? So
Yeah.
I really don't have a preferred application. But what I would say is that if I want something simple, quick, and easy, there you go, Docker. But when I'm talking about something more enterprise level that requires, a bit more of availability, more of the auto healing capabilities of Kubernetes, then there's no other system today than Kubernetes. Do that.
Absolutely.
As they do. And I'd like to thank Google for that, because actually that's where it comes from. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Now, you might need to allow me to share my screen. I can't share my screen.
No, I don't know. That's not a good thing. How about who can share host only? There we go. Host and panelist. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties, and that is my mistake.
There we go. So now we can see hopefully my screen. Can you all see like a Portainer instance here and a little like YAML manifest on the side?
Looks great.
Cool. Right then. So I purposely left this YAML manifest because it's just a simple way. I mean, it's like the simplest YAML manifest I managed to, and believe me, I wrote this from scratch, right? You might not believe, but I did write this from scratch. Obviously, I used a little bit of references here and there, but to deploy a MySQL database, right? And as you see, it's got, removing the separators, 60 lines of code, roughly, right? Because we have 1, 2, and here in one single YAML file, I have the persistent volume claim, the deployment, and the service. How I'm going to deploy this, right? So usually you would use 3 separate files. That's the most traditional way of deploying things with Kubernetes. You have one thing for service, the other one for volumes and storage, and the third one for deployment, and maybe even more files depending on what you want to do in this deployment, right? Now let's count how many interactions I need to be able to do the same deployment with Portainer. I'm going to pick, and as you see, I've got like 3 different locations here. One is in London, the other one's in Singapore, and one's in Helsinki. And before I do the deployment, I just want to mention that this is also something very cool about Portainer. The ability to manage Kubernetes clusters, regardless of where they are in this beautiful blue planet of ours. If you have connectivity, you can manage that cluster. And that's a really cool thing about Portainer. It's totally, let's say, unrelated to where you're standing. And by the way, you live in Texas, right, Sean?
I do live in Texas.
I live in Costa Rica. So I'm in Costa Rica managing a cluster that's in London, the other one's that's in Singapore, and the other one's in Helsinki. I mean, 4 different locations in this beautiful planet of ours. And I'm going to deploy this Kubernetes cluster. This database on the London civil offer of Kubernetes that we have here. And we start by, best practice. Let's create a namespace. I'll just create a little namespace, call it, as you know, it's a best practice to avoid deploying things on the default namespace. This is a little interesting form. I'm just going to show it very quickly here. I can manage assignments and in terms of resources and quotas for storage and for several other little capabilities that we have in Kubernetes, like load balancing, etc., and define registries. But in this case, I'm just going to create the simple namespace called webinar MySQL. And now I'm going to deploy this up. So let's say step number 1, create the namespace, right? But that's pretty much default. That's something that anyone would do, you considering best practice. Now let's use the form. Step number 2, I am going to select the namespace and give this a name. I'm going to call it DB00. Step number 3. Let's select the image. And I like to use the Ubuntu MySQL image. They have a very interesting list of containers that they curate. They actually have, the way it is, I think it's an LTS of 5 years, long-term support of 5 years for each container image. And if you want to pay for that, you have more time. But anyway, we're not here to talk about them. We're here to talk about Portainer. So I selected the image, the Ubuntu MySQL image. I know I need a variable. This is step number 4. That's MySQL. Actually, no, I don't. I'm using, no, I'll use the variable here. Step number 4. Password, I'm going to say DB1234. Let's go for persistence. Okay, step number 5. Lib. This is the standard MySQL folder. Give it 10 gigs of a space. And finally, well, there are more options that you can see here. The way you deploy this this container or this application, you can reserve more limits here if you want, more guardrails. If it's going to be replicated, how many instances of this container or you want to run, or pod. If you have auto scaling enabled, you could enable auto scaling here. Placement rules. I mean, this form is very complete. I'm going for step number, if I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6, which is create the service. And I'm going to use the standard MySQL port. So let's see. Number 1 was the namespace. 2, naming the deployment. 3, selecting the image. 4, giving it a variable. 5, selecting storage options. And finally 6, how I'm going to publish this application or this pod. 7 is the click that makes it all happen against 16. Okay. So if that's not making it easier, I don't know what it is. Right. I really don't know what it is, because and now I can monitor the deployment. I can go into the namespace, see if it's pulling the image, if it's already started, if I have any issues here in the events. It's waiting for the volume to be created on Civil. And soon enough, this application is going to start as soon as that volume, I'm running this on a cloud provider. It's not very snappy. It takes a little bit of time, but very soon this application is going to start, and I can monitor here in the events. It's already attached to volume. So here, very easily, without having to run any commands, I can monitor the deployment. I can see how it's being deployed. I see the variables here. I'm seeing where it was, which node it's going to run. In this case, DB double. Let's see which node is it. Let's see which node it's going to run on. Oh, here it is. This node. This is the node. I can check some logs if it's already running. And there you go. It started. Let's go to application, see if it started. There it is, replicated. I selected only one instance, and I have MySQL running with 7, no more than 7, 8 clicks. If I want to obviously elaborate a little bit more and I want to edit this, I can. I don't need to go into that YAML file, edit the YAML file, add more options. All I need to do is click on the application, and I can redeploy it, select more options if I need to. Sorry, it's a little bit slow, but soon enough, there you go. This is the application dashboard. I can edit this, and I can add more options if I need to, like change the storage or add more environment variables if I need to, add resources, everything in one single form. So this is how powerful and how easy it is to deploy an application using Portainer. Now there are more methods that I can show, and I will show. The second one is using a custom template. Now this is really cool because we compared a traditional MySQL deployment using a YAML file with the 3 basic components, the storage, the deployment, and the service that, as you see, I replicated here with 7 single steps. Now I'm going to use a custom template, and I'm going to do that here in the Singapore Kubernetes cluster running on DigitalOcean. So I go to the Singapore Kubernetes cluster and I say, okay, same thing. I'm going to create a namespace. Let's use something slightly different. Let's use the kubectl shell, right? If you need to use kubectl, you want to use kubectl, you can. We allow you to use kubectl within Portainer. Now, why is this interesting? Because this reduces the requirement to open a SSH terminal shell to your nodes. So it enables you to talk to the cloud, to the Kubernetes cluster directly, and you don't need to open that SSH port. Actually, you can close that port if you want to. So here we'll say kubectl create an S webinar, and let's call it Redis. This is what I'm going to deploy with my custom template. I will close this, refresh my namespaces, and there it is. Nice. So I'm going to select this custom template. Here it is, Redis. let me just show it to you. When I select this Redis custom template, I have here still the option to customize it a little bit more if I want to. I'm fine as it is. I'm going to put it in the proper namespace, call it Redis 01, and click on deploy. And that's it. It's deploying Redis. Now, you might ask, okay, what's the applicability of a custom template? Imagine the following. Imagine that you have a team of data engineers, for example, they need to deploy Hadoop, they need to deploy Kafka, they need to deploy, Jupyter Notebooks, RStudio. It's usually a suite, it's a basic suite that data engineers they use to crunch numbers and run their data, right? But they don't need to know what Kubernetes is. They don't want to know. It's just like similar to the case Sean was mentioning about developers, right? They develop, they don't need to worry about running infrastructure. A custom template comes very handy in this situation. You can just allow a regular data engineer that is a user of containers to spin up their environment very easily with a custom template, right? And not only that, you can give them the power to manage the life cycle of this application. So let's say they use Redis, for example, wouldn't be a bad example, but let's say they do use Redis for whatever reason, and they're done with Redis. They're like, okay, I don't need this anymore. They can go ahead and remove it and just say goodbye. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Goodbye, Redis. So you empower the user to enable usage of applications, microservices, without necessarily having to teach them what is a container, what is Kubernetes. They have that power. All you have to do is develop a custom template that is good enough for their use case, and that's pretty much it. And we support very interesting options here, like mustache variables, for example, to give some more power to the user so they can enable, these extra features or extra variables if they are, smart enough to do that, or if you can train them to do that, if it's the case. So you can do that also. The other interesting thing about custom templates is that you can enable RBAC. If we have time, I'll talk a little bit about RBAC, which is our role-based access control engine. So that's also possible with Portainer. Okay, that was the second option of how to deploy applications and containers with Portainer. As you see, very simple, very easy. Custom templates, right? Let's see. Any questions, guys? Is this so far looking good?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Fire on.
One of the things that we always talk about is usability or different use cases, right? You just quickly articulated two very simple ways to deploy a container. And I think on the custom template screen, I guess on the next screen after that, it showed things like Git repositories, obviously the custom templates. How does GitOps fit into this conversation?
Great question. And this is the third, slightly more advanced way of deploying containers with Portainer. And for that, I'm going to select now this other Kubernetes cluster running in Helsinki. And what I'm going to use is a more advanced deployment using a manifest where I connect Portainer to an external repository. In this case, I have a custom repository that I set up for this webinar, and I'm going to deploy Mini.io. It's an S3 engine, storage engine that emulates Amazon S3 buckets. But again, let's do the proper thing. Let's create a namespace, cuddle, create an S. Let's call it webinar. Mini.io. There you go. Okay, let's just refresh this. And let's select that namespace, and you'll see what I want to achieve here, considering your question. I'm going to call it Mini.io 88, whatever. Okay, so we want to connect Portainer to this repository, right, in order to enable GitOps. So I am going to copy the link to the repository, paste it here, and our Portainer already starts telling me that there are things I have to do. So this shows that this tool is opinionated, but in a way to help you be more productive and reduce errors when it comes to deploying containers, right? So I need to enable authentication, and I already have a credential. No, I don't actually. I need to set up my credential here for this repository. Let me select my GitHub API here. It's here, and I paste it here, and I can save this credential if I want, webinar. And now Portainer has access to this repository. And I'm going to deploy it. Let's see. Okay, it's successful because it's reading the listing of files that I have in this repository. Now, where does GitOps come into this picture? This nice, beautiful deployment when I select automatic updates. And here is where things become very, very cool. I can pull this repository starting with a minimum of 1 minute and check for changes on my Git repository. If there are any changes that happen to that YAML manifest, Portainer after that interval will it will catch those changes and do a git push, a git pull, and redeploy your application. So this makes sometimes some CD tools obsolete, because this is pretty much continuous deployment, right? This is what we do. We also have the option of webhooks if you want to have more control. If you want to put this in a pipeline of a CI tool where you have to have more control over this deployment, you also have the option of using webhooks. Well, I'll just select webhook for now. There are some other extra features like always apply manifest that ensures that your manifest here is the one single source of truth, even if there are changes locally on your Kubernetes application or deployment. Whenever Portainer has this selected, it's going to reapply whatever is on the Git repository. And if you're using custom or self-signed certificates, you want to skip the TLS certification verification here if it's the case. Okay, so let's deploy this. So what's happening now is that Portainer is doing a Git clone of this repository from here, and it's deploying this. What this means is that everything that is referenced in this YAML manifest, that means extra files like environment variables or configuration files, also they come into this deployment because Portainer is going to respect that. It's going to do a full cloning of this repository, and if that's referenced in your YAML manifest, it's going to be utilized in the deployment. Let's see if it's already running. Okay, Mini.io is already running, and let's go into Mini.io and let's see. Let's just check this password here. It's let's see, Vivo1234. Okay, and the user is Mini.io. So I know that the console port for Mini.io is 9090, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is. And here you go. You have Mini.io running. Given the user and the password, and whoop, we're in Mini.io. But hey, now I need to change something. I want to change this password. I'm going to call it webinar. Not very original, I know, but webinar 1234. And I commit the change. Remember we have that webhook, Sean? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke this webhook. I'm going to go into edit application, copy the webhook once more.
But and as you're showing this, I think that's the one thing that is interesting to me as you're finalizing this, right? Different applications and different services require different methods of deployment, right? Some need a full integrated CI/CD. Some need pick up just CI, right? Some just need CD. And so what I think is interesting, I'm now obviously you're invoking it to try and speed it up, but this idea behind, what you've shown is we want to provide a variety of options, right?
Exactly.
To fit your use case, to fit your business case. I may prefer one, you may prefer another one. That's what it is, right? And this is what I love about, kind of how we've built this, and it's really about usability at the end of the day. So makes sense.
Exactly. So now if I refresh this, I'm going to have to log in again, very likely. But now the password has changed to webinar. Oops, let me type this again. Webinar 1234. Let's see. Log in. Okay. So it caught that change. You see, I changed the password. I mean, there's nothing that can prove more that the change really was applied than the password, I suppose, right? So and it could have been anything, as you said, it could have been like the username, it could be any other variable that you need to restructure or redeploy on your application. And there are ways to do that, not only with the webhook, we can also use the polling method. I mean, it has to be flexible, right? It has to be flexible. And this is what Portainer brings in, options to enable you to manage your deployment, be that with a single form, be that with a custom template, be that with GitOps using webhooks or by polling. I mean, there's so many options, but none of them makes using Kubernetes complex. We try to simplify this as best as we can, as much as possible. And another thing you maybe noticed, Sean, the interface here is the same. I'm running 3 different types of Kubernetes clusters, 3 distros. They're probably in 3 different versions. Civil is running on 126, Digital Ocean 127. This MicroK8 Helsinki, it's a bare metal deployment actually, 124, but the interface is the same, right? Why make it complex? Why not make it easy for our users? That's very, very important. And just to finalize this, I want to show that there are other capabilities that we have with Portainer. Like if you want to deploy a Kubernetes cluster using any of these 6 cloud providers, we enable that for you. I actually deployed all 3 Kubernetes clusters using this interface. I just selected my cloud provider. I have my credentials here already stored in Portainer. Here, all these 3 cloud providers, and I also have one for bare metal, which I will show soon. And I want to deploy a cluster. I select any of these if I have a subscription, obviously, and deploy my Kubernetes cluster. Finally, I can also deploy a bare metal Kubernetes cluster using MicroK8s, which was the 3rd last option of Kubernetes cluster we see here, where I just defined the SSH credential, the IP range, could be with a comma or with a range, and clicked on provision environment. And there we go. I had a bare metal Kubernetes cluster being deployed via Portainer and running and being managed with Portainer. And the interface is the same. Sometimes you have to really pay attention because you want to make sure you're doing the right operation in the right cluster, right? Because the interface has to be consistent. It has to be simple. It has to be usable in a way that users don't have to fall into having changes in the way they deploy their containers. Okay, great. It's so simple that I don't have anything else unless we have some questions. That's how it is, guys. This is how simple it is to deploy containers and applications with Portainer on Kubernetes.
No, that's awesome, Adolfo. One of the things that I have, and look, I've been at Portainer for 4 months now, and one of the things that I have continued to be impressed by is this. We're talking about Kubernetes today, right? You're showing 3 different Kubernetes clusters and different node sizes in each one. It happens to be MicroK8s in different regions and different locations, right? But if you were to go to one of our customer environments or even some of your other test environments, it shows Docker, Swarm, right? And it just becomes an overarching container management platform rather than a Kubernetes management platform or Docker management platform and so on, right? Because that's really what we focus on at Portainer. It's container adoption, container management, and simplification, right? It just and I think that's one of the hard parts. Is sometimes we go down one particular path when it could be multiple. And so I'm sure you're probably popping up an environment here after authenticating and doing that bravely, might I add, while live on a webinar. I one time shared my API keys.
Oh my God.
I did. It was on purpose, and unless you knew what was going on, like they had an API key, but they were missing one piece of information. But I got kind of called out for it. It's kind of funny. But as Adolfo showing here, right? We've got Docker Swarm, you've got Docker as well. Azure ACI. I think the key here is we want to manage and help you simplify the management of the infrastructure layer, but underneath that, it's really all about the applications and the containers underneath. Okay. And so as you're thinking about your challenges, what you're working with and what you're working through, right? while this is focused on Kubernetes, we focus on everything. And to that, I think the last kind of statement I'll make, or kind of last comment, I'll leave this question for Adolfo, is while I've managed each of these individually in a variety of ways, but the simplification around role-based access or around permissions and managing not only at the container level, but also at the infrastructure level or the orchestrator level, right? That's another area that Portainer loves to focus on, and we love to hear from our customers on. Could you say a quick few words on that type of activity, role-based access, managing, different infrastructure levels along with container levels, and how you see that as a part of the conversation?
And I'm going to focus that question a little bit more on Kubernetes, because whoever's played with Kubernetes and tried to play around with RBAC, pure Kubernetes RBAC, probably, if not had something similar to what I'm going to describe, it's something very close to wanting to throw yourself in fetal position and starting to cry like an 8-year-old, because it's so hard. I mean, it's like mind-blowing hard in the sense that whenever you're going to have to apply a change, oh God, you have to undo everything that you did and redo everything back with the changes that you need to apply when it comes to permissions or RBAC with Kubernetes. Whereas with Portainer, this is so much easier. Let me just run a quick little script here so I can set a list of users. I'm just going to generate dummy users here where the script is running. Let's see. 5 little users here. They're okay. They're there. Let's get finished. Yeah, finished. So all these users are standard users. I'm the administrator. And the way Portainer works with users and teams, and let me set 3 teams here. Let me see if I have them already set up. I don't. Nope. Let me run another script here. Boom. I'm setting up 3 teams. Is that I allow across any of my resources and Kubernetes clusters. Did it set up a team? It should have. Let's see. Users, teams. No, it didn't. Anyway, I'll set them up manually. Allows through any of my Kubernetes clusters access to any of the resources, not only the clusters themselves, but with a single interface, with a single database, better said. I don't need to think of how I'm going to deploy this in one cluster and then undo what I deployed previously to redo everything back. It's very easy to do this with Portainer. Let me set up a team and show you. So I'm going to set up a prod team, for example. Okay, I'm going to create this team. And I'm going to add Brandon, Bill, and Denise. And now I'm going to say on the civil Kubernetes cluster, I will set up this team. Where is the team? Prod team. And they're going to be standard users. Okay. Because they work on this cluster. They can deploy containers. They can operate on this cluster. Now, for this other Kubernetes, this bigger class Kubernetes, I can also set up the same team with another role, prod team as a read-only user. And you know what? I need to give someone here a admin access. Now, this is just the way it works with Portainer, right? Whereas with traditional Kubernetes, again, it's a total nightmare. Right, it's very hard. You have to have some sort of parallel control of how you're doing things or when you're doing things and what service accounts you're enabling with what RBAC feature or permission. Whereas with Portainer, if I want to change Brandon's role, it's easy. I just go ahead and say, all right, I'm going to downgrade him to help desk and update. With traditional Kubernetes, this is just, oh my God. And there's more. Not only you can do this with the Kubernetes clusters, you can do that with any environment that you're managing with Portainer. All of these environments, for example, that I'm using and that I'm showing here on the second instance that I'm using to demo, I can do just the same for Docker with these teams and users I have here, as much as I can do the same type of access management to this same Kubernetes, to this other Kubernetes cluster, the same interface. So RBAC is extremely, extremely powerful. And I did promise to show a little bit about custom templates and how you can also apply RBAC to resources with Portainer. So it's not just about access to environments, but access control to resources. So let's say this Redis custom template, I want to restrict access to a given team. I can't. I can say that the production team is the only team or set of users that will have access to this custom template. So whoever is not in this team will not have access to this template. And this you can apply to namespaces, just the same. You can say in this given namespace, only one user, and actually this team will have access to this namespace. So, and again, RBAC is around pretty much every resource that you have or need to apply RBAC to in Portainer. Same thing with registries, although I don't think I have a registry here. Let me see here. Let me connect to a microcase cluster here, and show you registries. Yes, I can have also registry RBAC access managed with Portainer here. Very easy, same interface. James, there you go.
Perfect.
So that's how powerful and how easy it is to manage RBAC with Portainer. And it's, again, it's not just about Kubernetes, it's whatever environment you have and you're managing under a Portainer instance.
Makes sense. Well, Adolfo, I want to say thank you for keeping my attention and the rest of the attendees' attention. There are no other questions. So if you don't mind, if you want to stop sharing your screen, I'll close this out. And as always, I'll just say thank you for taking the time. I know I appreciate it. And really, as always, I'm always amazed and learn something new every time. So just so we've, talked about it, we have looked at deploying applications via several methods in that process. Adolfo has talked about and shown us different ways to monitor and manage those applications, the containers that sit underneath that. And my favorite question is, or my favorite focus area is around security and compliance. And clearly he showed us role-based access, really even editing of containerized applications that are deployed on a variety of orchestrators and so on. And so I really do appreciate what you've shown us today, Adolfo. And just so everybody is aware, as we close this out, this will be made available to everybody that not only attends, but also signed up and for some reason was not able to attend. And so we will continue to, we will provide that, give us a few days to sort through the recording, to send out the emails. And so those will be on their way soon. And, we at Portainer want to say thank you. Really, your participation, your ability to, or your feedback and your comments, and your help to the community is really appreciated and warranted. If you have anything, if you have any questions for us, reach out to us on community Slack, find us on social media. And on behalf of the rest of the Portainer team, I want to say thank you all for joining us today. And to Adolfo, thank you for showing us your expertise and your excellence, sir.
John, thank you very much. Thank
Absolutely.
you, everyone who participated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, we're going to be continuing to do this in a variety of ways. We'll have different topics coming soon, so be on the lookout for new ones. And we look forward to all of you joining us again. Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.